What is a clinical trial? It's when a team of scientists and doctors tries a new medical treatment, drug, device, or method on a group of people to test how well it works. In many cases the trial might be for something that is not yet available to the general population of people with an illness. This could be especially useful if you have a serious illness and have run out of effective standard treatments. Scientists first test these new treatments with laboratory experiments. Next, they try them on laboratory animals. Only when they deem them safe and useful enough in these early stages does a clinical trial start on people, first in small groups and then in larger ones. Clinical trials help doctors discover the answers to these questions. Is the treatment safe and effective? Is the treatment potentially better than the treatments we have now? What are the side effects and risks of the treatment? What are the different phases of a clinical trial? Phase I, doctors give a new treatment to a small number of people to test safety. The researchers find out the best way to give the new treatment, any possible side effects, and safe dosage. Phase II, the research team tries to figure out how well the treatment works for a particular illness. Phase III, the team compares the new treatment with the standard treatment. It tries to examine the effects of different dosages and combinations of treatments on different populations. They study the effects on men, women, young, old, and various ethnic groups. Phase IV, here, the treatment is tried on average patients who agree to it. The goal is to look for side effects not found in prior phases and to figure out how well the treatment works over the long term. The FDA allows drug makers to market the treatment during this phase. European regulations specify that the trials providing the underlying data for marketing applications of new drugs need to comply with the Declaration of Helsinki. Some important paragraphs from the declaration are briefly summarized below. 8. Vulnerable research populations require special protection. 11. Research must be based on knowledge of laboratory and animal experimentation. 13. The protocol for a clinical trial should be reviewed by an independent ethical review committee. The researchers must report any serious adverse events to this committee. 16. The design of all studies should be publicly available. 17. Investigations should be ceased if the risks are found to outweigh the potential benefits. 19. The research is only justified if there is a reasonable likelihood that the populations in which the research is carried out stand to benefit from the results of the research. 20. Participation in a trial must be voluntary and participants must be informed. Informed consent. 22. Physicians should obtain freely given informed consent from each participant. 24. Subjects who cannot provide informed consent themselves, for example children, should only be included in the research, cannot be performed on other subjects instead. 29. The benefits, risks, burdens and effectiveness of a new therapy should be tested against those of the best currently available therapy. Placebo-controlled trials are only allowed if no proven therapy exists or under special circumstances. 30. At the conclusion of the study, all trial participants should be assured access to the best proven therapy identified by the study. Post-trial access arrangements must be described in the trial protocol. 31. When medical research is combined with medical care, the physician should inform the patient which aspects of the care are related to the research. General observations. The overview below is necessarily incomplete and biased towards unethical trials that have caught some publicity. Some general observations can still be made. Firstly, unethical trials have occurred around the world, in both developed and developing countries. In some cases, the trials had not been approved by an ethical review committee or institutional review board, or approval had been given for an unethical trial design. Hence there appear to be flaws, and sometimes rather serious ones, in the regulatory systems of various countries. Secondly, the research organizations involved range from relatively unknown local companies to leading multinational corporations. This might be surprising, given that large multinational corporations usually have clear public commitments to high ethical standards in clinical trials. Thirdly, some of the unethical trials are of a recent date, some were even being carried out in 2005 or later. Although it is sometimes argued that instances of unethical clinical trials are isolated and outdated, this is not always true. Note that some older cases have been included in the overview as well, mainly because the developments following these trials are still going on. And finally, the nature of ethical concerns appears to be rather diverse and relates to all paragraphs of the DOE summarized above. The lack of voluntary, informed participation and adequately informed consent are probably the most common problems. Cases of trials that did not undergo adequate ethical review or failed to report serious adverse events indicate flaws in the regulation of clinical trials. Tests with experimental drugs, of which the safety for testing in humans have not yet been fully established, may be among the most alarming examples. Let us go through some of the reports on the disastrous clinical trials conducted by leading pharmaceutical companies. 1. Drugs on the trial were lamivudine or zidovudine, Combivir, plus Tenofovir, Viriad, or Nevirapine, Viramune, or Abacavir, Xiagen, DART trial. Treatment was for antiretroviral therapy, ART. Unethical aspects. The development of antiretroviral therapy in Africa, DART, trial. It was an open, randomized trial to compare standard continuous therapy, CT, with structured treatment interruption, STI. Duration, of 12 weeks on and 12 weeks off antiretroviral therapy, ART. The trial had recruited 3,300 volunteers. Trial venue. It was at the Joint Clinical Research Center, Kampala, Uganda, the MRC or UVRI Uganda Research Unit on AIDS, Entebbe. Also, at the University of Zimbabwe College of Health Sciences, Harare. On March 14, 2006, it was decided that all patients in the STI arm of the trial would be switched to continuous therapy. As interim data demonstrated, they had a greater rate of clinical HIV-related disease. Critics say they had sounded alarms the year before already because of the relatively high number of fatalities in the STI arm in Uganda. But the investigators replied that their concerns were unfounded. Attempts to put patients whose situation deteriorated during treatment interruption back on ART failed, and some of the patients died during the interruption period. There have also been complaints about A. Enrollment of patients desperate to get free treatment. B. Insufficient arrangements for post-trial treatment access. C. The use of a drug regimen that is not readily available to the general population, and D. Omission of important risks in the consent forms. Similar ethical concerns apply to the Strategies for Management of Antiretroviral Therapy, SMART, trial, which compared continuous ART with episodic drug treatment as well. The Data and Safety Monitoring Board, DSMB, also found that treatment interruption was associated with a higher risk of disease progression. Enrollment in the SMART trial was halted 2 months earlier, in January 2006, and reinitiation of interrupted therapy was recommended. Trivakin is another ART trial with 2 treatment interruption arms. For one group of patients, the treatment interruption is determined by CD4 cell counts, a measure for the functioning of the patient's immune system. For a second group, the treatment is interrupted according to a fixed schedule. The Trivakin trial enrolled approximately 840 patients in Côte d'Ivoire since 2002 and still ongoing. What were the norms violated in DART trial? Investigations may not have been ceased in time after a negative risk or benefit balance for STI was identified. The population as which the research was carried out might not benefit from the results of the study, as Tenofovir is not readily available in Uganda and Zimbabwe. Voluntary informed consent was obtained for each patient. But this may have been compromised by patients being desperate to get access to free treatment, and risks may not have been sufficiently explained. Post-trial access arrangements were unclear and apparently not described in the trial protocol. This would also effectively inhibit patients to leave the trial. What was the final outcome? The investigators of the DART trial denied lethal side effects of treatment interruption and ethical shortcomings in the trials. On 17 July 19, 2006, the Office of AIDS Research, OAR, of the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NIH, and the Treatment Action Group, DAG, held an international workshop to discuss the conduct of STI and intermittent therapy trials. A review of available evidence confirmed that some trial participants were at increased risk of adverse events, including death. Not recommended. It was concluded that STI trials cannot be recommended until the findings from past trials have been better understood. 2. Tenofovir trials on HIV transmission. Drug on trial was tenofovir, Viriad. Treatment was for prevention of HIV transmission. Sponsors were Gilead, US CDC, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Research Organization, Family Health International, FHI, in Africa, US NIH and Cambodia. Period of the trial was 2004 to 2005. It was conducted at Cameroon, Thailand, Nigeria. Unethical aspects. In Cameroon, 5 women became HIV infected while enrolled in the Tenofovir study. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, claim the 400 sex workers participating in the trial were not adequately informed. They were not informed about the risks and only English information was given to mostly French-speaking volunteers. There was a lack of ARVs for patients infected during the trial. In Thailand, key community groups including the Thai Drug Users Network, TDN, and the Thai AIDS Treatment Advocacy Group, TTAG, claim their concerns have been ignored by the trial investigators and they were not consulted about the trial design and conduct until a very late stage. They are concerned that intravenous drug users participating in the trial in Thailand will not have access to free, clean syringes through needle exchange programs. In case the drug would be effective, the researchers had not ensured a rollover study to take care of trial participants. In the interim period between study closure and marketing approval. Furthermore, only 1 year of free post-trial access was negotiated, even though in Thailand at least 2 years of post-trial drug access would be the norm. In Cambodia, the Women's Network for Unity, a local union of sex workers, protested as they perceived that medical insurance for trial participants would be insufficient. FHI cancelled the study in Nigeria, giving as a reason that the quality of the local study team was inadequate. But activists claim that FHI wanted to avoid another scandal and cancelled the trial a few days before the release of the Nigeria HIV Vaccine and Microbicide Advocacy Group, NIMAG, report. Similar trials were planned in Ghana, Peru, Botswana, and Malawi. What were the norms violated? Vulnerable subjects may not have received the required special protection. Participants had not been adequately informed. Post-trial access arrangements were insufficient. What was the final outcome? The trials were cancelled in Cameroon in March 2005. Trials in Cambodia were cancelled in 2004 by Cambodian authorities. Cancelled. The impending study in Nigeria was cancelled by FHI. Community groups in Thailand asked for establishment of a broad committee to address key HIV issues, involvement in trial outreach and education, and ensuring at least 2 years of post-trial tenofovir access to trial participants. 3. Hepatitis C vaccine trial in Nepal. Hepatitis C vaccine was on trial. Sponsors were GSK, Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. It was conducted between 2001 to 2003 at Kathmandu, Nepal. Unethical aspects. In 1998, GSK and the Walter Reed Institute, which conducts medical research for the U.S. Army, started cooperating to develop a hepatitis C vaccine. Hepatitis C is a common disease in poor countries and there have been outbreaks in countries where U.S. troops are deployed. Preparations for Phase 2 trials were made in February 2000. Before launching the trials, GSK had already decided the vaccine would not be commercially developed for a traveler's market, while Walter Reed decided it would be unsuitable for U.S. soldiers. Still, GSK and Walter Reed went ahead with Phase 2 trials and wanted to test the candidate vaccine on 8,000 Nepalese volunteers in Lalitpur. It was without a plan to further develop the vaccine and make it available to the local population if the trials were successful. The Nepalese NGO Lomandi and municipal officers protested against the tests in Lalitpur because the majority of its population is illiterate and highly vulnerable. Walter Reed then decided to test the vaccine on 2,000 soldiers offered by the Royal Nepalese Army as volunteers. However, the soldiers were also considered a vulnerable group as they are poor and potentially subject to coercion by their superiors. What were the norms violated? Vulnerable subjects may not have received the required special protection. the population where the research was carried out is unlikely to benefit from the study. Consent may not have been fully informed and freely given. Post-trial access arrangements were apparently lacking. What was the final outcome? In March 2006, civil society groups sent a letter to GSK demanding that the vaccine is made available for free to the Royal Nepalese Army and the Lalitpur community, and offered to the Nepali Ministry of Health at not-for-profit prices. Furthermore, GSK should sign prior agreements with the communities impacted by the research to ensuring post-trial access if the vaccine is approved before further testing takes place. Apparently, the company did not publicly respond to the letter. In March 2007, the results of the study were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, NEJM. In June 2007, the NEJM published 2 letters to the editor, reiterating the need to further develop the vaccine and make it available to the Nepalese community, and a response from GSK. Explanation: the company explained that measures had been taken to remove the influence of military commanders over participation by subordinates, and that most soldiers approached for the trial refused to participate. GSK affirmed that it is committed to continue development of the hepatitis C vaccine so that it can be available in Nepal, but calls for external financing for the introduction of the vaccine through partnerships. 4. Nevirapine PMTCT trials in Uganda. Nevirapine, Viramune, was the drug on trial. It was for HIV prevention of mother-to-child transmission, PMTCT. Sponsors were Boehringer Ingelheim, by U.S. National Institutes of Health, NIH. It was conducted between 1997 to 2003 at Uganda. Unethical aspects. In the HiveNet-012 trial, investigators failed to get patients' consent about changes in the experiment and administered wrong doses. There were serious problems in record-keeping and delays and under-reporting of fatal and life-threatening problems. 14 deaths were not reported. Researchers acknowledged thousands of side effects and adverse reactions were not disclosed. Procedures for divulging serious adverse events, SAEs, were not followed. Boehringer Ingelheim, the company that markets the drug and audited the trial, asked the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NIH, to destroy an early copy of the research report in case the study would be audited by the U.S. Food and Drug Authority, FDA. What were the norms violated? Serious adverse events were not reported. Informed consent from participants about changes in the trial protocol was not obtained. What was the final outcome? Problems were revealed in early 2002 and Boehringer Ingelheim withdrew its FDA marketing application. In 2004, the FDA recommended the NIH to stop using the drug with certain patients in Africa and issued warnings about side effects. Boehringer Ingelheim, by, stated that the trial was conducted under the sole responsibility of the NIH. By at no point covered up any information or destroyed any documents. 5. SFBC Miami Test Center. Various drugs were on trial. Sponsors were Pfizer, Merck & Company, Johnson & Johnson, Schering-Plough, Theravance, Purdue Pharma, AstraZeneca, and others. Research organization, SFBC conducted it during 2000 to 2005 at Miami, U.S. In November 2005, a special Bloomberg report revealed inappropriate testing at the SFBC Test Center in Miami. Violations. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, had already discovered significant violations in 2000 and 2002. What were the norms violated? Vulnerable subjects may not have received the required special protection. Ethical review committees were not fully independent. Participants were not allowed to leave the trials. Participants had not been adequately informed. What was the final outcome? SFBC denied the allegations. The company threatened to arrange federal deportation of Latin American immigrants who disclosed unethical aspects of the clinical trials and tried to make them sign false statements. Several top officials of the company resigned. In May 2006, SFBC announced that it will close down the test center in Miami and move planned drug trials to Canada. The U.S. Senate performed investigations into the company's conduct. 6. Letrozole trials in India. Letrozole was on trial for inducing ovulation. It was sponsored by Sun Pharmaceuticals during 2003 in India. What were the norms violated? Subjects were not informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not obtained. Unethical aspects. Letrozole, which belongs to the group of aromatase inhibitors, was tested by Sun Pharmaceuticals to induce ovulation. The drug has been approved globally for the treatment of breast cancer in postmenopausal women, but it is not approved for any other use in any country. More than 400 women who had been trying in vain to conceive were enrolled in 2003 without their knowledge or consent to take part in clinical trials conducted at 9 or more centers across India. What were the norms violated? Subjects were not informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not obtained. What was the final outcome? A complaint on the Letrozole case was filed in the Supreme Court by the Delhi-based NGO social jurist Novartis, who was not involved with the study but markets Letrozole under the brand name Femara. It sent a clarification letter to all infertility experts in India to remind them of the approved indication. 7. Alosetron trials after marketing withdrawal. Alosetron HCl, Lotranex, was on trial for the treatment for irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. It was sponsored by GlaxoSmithKline, now GlaxoSmithKline, during 2000 at various countries. Unethical aspects. In November 2000, GlaxoSmithKline withdrew its drug Lotranex from the U.S. market because of FDA safety concerns. Serious complications and 3 deaths potentially linked to Lotranex had been reported. However, 7,500 trial participants in other countries continued to take the drug after it was withdrawn in the U.S. What were the norms violated? Investigations were not ceased after the risks were found to outweigh the potential benefits. What was the final outcome? The company responded that it would take until the end of December 2000 to phase out the studies. 8. Streptokinase trials in India. Streptokinase, Streptokinase or Streptase, and insulin were on trial. It was for a clot-busting drug used in heart attacks, diabetes. Sponsors were Shanti Biotechnics, Streptokinase, Biocon, insulin. It was conducted on 2003 at Hyderabad, India. Unethical aspects. The companies had openly conducted illegal Phase 3 clinical trials of new drugs on unaware patients. It had conducted these improper clinical trials without permission from the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, GEAC. 8 patients died. Shanti Biotechnics denied the allegations. What were the norms violated in this trial? The trial protocol was not reviewed by an ethical review committee. Subjects were not informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not obtained. Litigation was filed by the Delhi-based NGO at our Destitute and Old People's Home. In March 2004, the Supreme Court of India confirmed that the trials had been illegal. 9. Fortified ORS trials in Peru. Oral rehydration solution, ORS, with added lactoferrin and lysozyme proteins, was on trial. It was for the treatment of diarrhea and sponsored by Ventria Bioscience. Research Organization. Institute for Child Health, Nutrition Research Institute. It was during 2004 to 2005 at 2 hospitals in Peru. Unethical aspects. Starting in August 2004, a fortified formulation of oral rehydration solution, ORS, was tested on 140 Peruvian babies and young children of age 5 to 33 months hospitalized with serious diarrhea. The enhanced ORS contained 2 synthetic human breast milk proteins produced by genetically modified, GM, rice. Ventria reports that the children who received it on average had a shorter duration of the diarrhea and a higher rate of recovery. One of the proteins was also studied in the U.S. among hospitalized elderly patients that receive large doses of antibiotics, to try to halt diarrhea. 2 children participating in the trial in Peru suffered serious allergic reactions and one of them would have become allergic to fruits and other foods. There exist previous studies that pointed out the dangers of GM rice proteins, including immune reactions. The proteins of Ventria Bioscience had not yet been approved for testing in the US or abroad, and studies on children in the US were not allowed. There are some doubts whether the parents that gave their consent were properly informed. What were the violated norms? Peruvian and US law, the proteins were not yet approved for testing. There are doubts as to whether the consent of parents was fully informed. The Peruvian Medical Association, a local NGO, denounced the trial. On request of a parliamentarian, a legal inquiry started in July 2006. The company insists that the study met all legal requirements, including approval from 3 independent scientific groups before the trial started. 10. Risperidone trials in India. Risperidone, was on trial. It was for the treatment of acute mania. It was sponsored by Johnson & Johnson probably during 2003 at Gujarat, India. Unethical aspects. During a trial for the treatment of acute mania, psychiatric patients were taken off their existing medication and told that it was discontinued and no longer available. They subsequently received risperidone or a placebo. This was controversial because the patients receiving a placebo could suffer unnecessary harm by being taken off their medication. One patient explained that he signed a form because the doctor required it, but had no idea that he was participating in a clinical trial. The norms violated were: not all subjects were informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not properly obtained from all participants. The use of a placebo was controversial because it was unnecessarily dangerous. It was not explained to all patients that the provided medical care was linked to a research. What happened later? Johnson & Johnson denies the allegations and stated that consent had been obtained from every patient. It defended that placebo-controlled trial exposed less patients to a potentially ineffective treatment. However, this does not explain why patients have to discontinue a proven existing treatment. 11. VGV1 trials in China. Drug VGV1 was on trial for anti-HIV therapy. It was sponsored by Viral Genetics, US, during 2003 at Dayton Hospital, Beijing, China. Unethical aspects. HIV-positive patients were not told about the risk of side effects from the investigational drug. Participants did not understand the informed consent forms and the physicians made no effort to explain them. In addition, participants complained expenses were not covered as agreed and they were not informed about the trial results despite asking. Violated norms were: informed consent was not properly obtained from all participants. What was the outcome? Following complaints from trial participants, the Institutional Review Board, IRB, of the National Center for AIDS or STD Prevention and Control inquired the issue. They recommended that the trials must be better explained in the future and expenses should be paid. However, it concluded there were no serious problems with the trial. 12. TGN1412 trials in London. Drug TGN1424 was on trial for the treatment of rheumatism. It was sponsored by Tehenro. Research Organisation, Prexel International conducted it during March 2006 at London, UK. Unethical aspects. When the anti-inflammatory drug candidate TGN1412 was tested in animals, it showed no significant side effects. It was first administered to 6 healthy volunteers in subsequent phase I trials. However, within minutes it caused potentially fatal multi-organ failure and they had to be taken to intensive care. The trials were carried out by the US-based CRO Prexel International in a private research facility in London. It had been approved by the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. After the event, ethicists who were shown the consent form for the drug trial found that the trial participants had not been adequately informed about the risks involved. Dutch experts later found that essential information, substantiating claims on how the drug would affect humans compared to monkeys, was not available to the MRHA when the trial was approved. What were the norms violated? Key information from preclinical testing was missing in the documentation for approval of the trial. Participants had not been adequately informed. What was the outcome? the MHRA suspended the clinical trial authorization for the drug. It performed an exhaustive inquiry of Parexel and confirmed that the trial was run according to the approved protocol. However, the MHRA investigation did not include a review of the consent form. All 6 participants survived, but one had toes and fingers amputated. 13. Imatinib clinical trials. Drugs Imatinib, Gleevec, was on trial for the treatment of chronic myeloid leukemia, CML. It was sponsored by Novartis from 2001 onwards at South Korea, Hong Kong and other countries. Unethical aspects. After the launch of Imatinib in the US and Europe in 2001, 7,500 patients received the drug during clinical trials for regulatory approvals in other countries. Novartis had announced free supplies to people around the world that could not afford its costs of $27,000 per year. However, donations were only provided to small numbers of patients and sometimes cancelled during pricing disputes. After approval, Novartis threatened to end free supplies to 53 patients who had participated in trials in Hong Kong. It was done to press the government to provide the drug through a subsidized program and negotiate a higher price. There has also been a dispute in South Korea over the pricing of Imatinib. The company defended that its expanded access program in South Korea was not a clinical trial, but that argument was later invalidated. In India, where market exclusivity was obtained in 2003, costs became unsustainable for former generics users and aid groups were forced to withdraw their support for CML patients. After market exclusivity of Gleevec in India was cancelled in 2006, Novartis challenged this decision in court. What were the norms violated? Post-trial access arrangements were insufficient. What was the outcome? Disputes over the pricing of the drug continue. In India, the People's Health Movement of Karnataka called for a boycott of Novartis products after previous appeals to withdraw the court case had failed. 14. Ragaglizar trials in India and other countries. Drug Ragaglizar was on trial for diabetes treatment. It was sponsored by Novo Nordisk during 2002 at 32 countries, including India. Unethical aspects. Indian scientists questioned the ethics of the Phase 3 clinical trials of the drug before it was fully tested on animals. The trials were conducted in 32 countries, including EU countries and the US, and involved 2,500 people. Novo Nordisk stated that prior approval had been obtained in each country. The trials were suspended by the company after it discovered a mouse, and several rats, treated with the drug had developed urinary bladder tumors. In India, 130 people from 8 centers participated in the trials. Half of them received the experimental drug. What were the violated norms? It was disputed whether required animal experiments had been completed. Under Indian Council of Medical Research (ICMR) regulations, the results of toxicity studies on drugs for chronic diseases had to be available before Phase 3 clinical trials begin. In the EU and the US, this is not required. What was the outcome? The trials were suspended in July 2002. Novo Nordisk refuted allegations that it had not acted appropriately and stated that long-term carcinogenic study data were only required when filing a marketing application. The company conducted a clinical follow-up program, which indicated no relation between Ragaglizar exposure and cancer in the trial participants. 15. Trovafloxacin trials in Nigeria. Drug Trovafloxacin, was on trial for the treatment of bacterial meningitis. It was sponsored by Pfizer during 1996 at Kano, Nigeria. Research organization, Pfizer. Unethical aspects. During an outbreak of meningitis in Kano, Nigeria, in 1996, Pfizer arrived several weeks after Médecins Sans Frontières. It performed a trial of Trovafloxacin, a new quinolone antibiotic. The drug was tested on children without parents' informed consent. Patients were unaware of the experiment. The trial was not approved in advance by an ethical review committee. Out of 190 children that were enrolled in the trial, 5 receiving Trovafloxacin and 6 receiving the existing treatment ceftriaxone died. Others suffered brain damage and paralysis. What were the violated norms? The trial protocol was not reviewed by an ethical review committee. Subjects were not informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not obtained. It was not explained that the medical care that provided was linked to a research. A lawsuit was filed against Pfizer in the U.S. in 2001. The suit was dismissed in 2002 on the grounds that it should be handled in Nigeria. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals repealed this in 2003 because the Nigerian court system was not an adequate alternative due to bias and corruption. In 2005, a federal judge in Manhattan dismissed the claims for a second time for lack of subject matter jurisdiction under the Alien Tort Claims Act. A further appeal was in process. In 2005, the Kano state government started a domestic court case. Nigerian report. In May 2006, an anonymous source provided a copy of a report by a panel of Nigerian medical experts that had remained hidden since it was written in 2001. The panel concluded that the trials had been illegal and exploitative and violated Nigerian law, the Declaration of Helsinki and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. In June 2007, the federal government of Nigeria filed separate charges against the company seeking $7 billion in compensation. In January 2008, the Nigerian High Court issued a warrant of arrest against 8 former directors of Pfizer. Pfizer continues to deny that the drug trial was unethical. 16. Cilastron trials in India. Drug Cilastron, Imatinib, was on trial for the treatment of diarrhea from irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. It was sponsored by Solvay Pharmaceuticals probably around 2000 in India. Unethical aspects. Phase 3 trials involving Cilanstron, a new molecule of Solvay Pharmaceuticals, were cleared by the Drugs Controller General of India, DCGI, even though only Phase 2 trials had been conducted abroad. At the time, trials of foreign drugs were permitted in India only at one step below the phase completed abroad. What were the violated norms? Before 2005, the Schedule Y of the Indian Drug and Cosmetic Act prohibited clinical trials in India of drugs developed outside the country before Phase 2 trials were completed abroad. Phase 3 trials of such drugs were only allowed if the drug had already been fully tested elsewhere. What was the outcome? In April 2005, the FDA issued a non-approvable letter regarding Solvay's marketing application for Cilanstron and requested additional clinical trials. In November 2005, Solvay withdrew its new drug application, NDA, in the US. Discussions with EU authorities continued, but attempts to obtain EU marketing authorization may also have been abandoned. 17. Zoniporide trials in India. Drug Zoniporide was on trial for the treatment of perioperative cardiac events. It was sponsored by Pfizer probably around 2000 in India. Unethical aspects. The Drugs Controller General of India, DCGI, approved Phase 3 trial of Pfizer's Zoniporide while Phase 2 trials had not been completed in the USA. Carcinogenic and reproductive studies on animals mandated by Indian law had not been completed. What were the violated norms? Required animal experiments had not yet been completed. Before 2005, the Schedule Y of the Indian Drug and Cosmetic Act prohibited clinical trials in India of drugs developed outside the country before Phase 2 trials were completed abroad. Phase 3 trials of such drugs were only allowed if the drug had already been fully tested elsewhere. The outcome was not known. 18. Maximin trial in Russia. Drug histamine 2-HCl, Maximin, was on trial for the treatment for hepatitis C. It was sponsored by Maximin Pharmaceuticals, US, around 2000 at Russia, Israel, Belgium, and UK. Unethical aspects. The US FDA insisted on more animal tests before testing the drug Maximin on human subjects. The company could not get approval for Phase 3 trials in the US and wanted to proceed with the testing. It moved trials to Russia where the research plan was approved in 30 days. In Russia, researchers were not aware that the FDA required more animal testing. What were the violated norms? Animal experiments may have been insufficient to continue with testing on patients. What was the outcome? In August 2000, Maxim announced a $100 million deal with Roche for further development of the drug. 19. Trials on foster care children in New York. Various ARV drug combinations and vaccines were on trial. Didanosine, Zidovudine, Nevirapine, Ritonavir, Valacyclovir, live-attenuated varicella vaccine, Varivax, 7-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. Recombinant interleukin-2, RIL-2, recombinant envelope proteins of HIV-1 GP160 and GP120. They were for ARV therapy and vaccinations against infectious diseases. Sponsors were, U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. U.S. National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, NICHD, Genentech, Microgene Systems, Letterly Praxis Biologicals. They were conducted during 1997 to 2002 at New York, U.S. Unethical aspects. Phase 1 and 2 clinical trials were conducted on HIV-infected children and infants in the guardianship of New York City Agency for Children's Services, ACS. They were living at Incarnation Children's Center in Harlem, a foster care facility under contract with ACS. The ACS provided consent for their participation. Children were forced to take the experimental medication that made them severely ill and had potentially lethal side effects. What were the violated norms? The children were vulnerable subjects and did not receive the required special protection. The research should not have been performed on children without justification. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations prohibits the use of children who are wards of the state from being subjected to experiments involving greater than minimal risk. What was the outcome? The trials were suddenly halted in 2002. The Office for Human Research Protections, OHRP, conducted an investigation and confirmed non-compliance with legal regulations for the protection of human research subjects. 20. Cilastazol trials in India. Drug Cilastazol, Platol, was on trial for the treatment of intermittent claudication. It was sponsored by OTSCA probably around 1999 in India. Unethical aspects. Drug trials were cleared by the Drugs Controller General of India, DCGI, based on incomplete, inadequate information on adverse effects. Common serious side effects such as angina and myocardial infarction were not mentioned. Adverse events. What were the violated norms? Serious adverse events were not reported. Outcome was not known. 21. NDGA trials in India. Drug Nortihydrogauric acid, NDGA, was on trial for the treatment of oral cancer. It was sponsored by Johns Hopkins Hospital, U.S. Research Organization, Regional Cancer Treatment Center, RCC. It was conducted during 1999 to 2000 at Trivandrum, India. Unethical aspects. The drug was tried on 26 cancer patients before its safety was established in animal tests. The patients were not informed that they were taking part in an experiment or that they were being denied an established treatment, and 2 of them died. Subsequently, a 60-year-old woman was again included for a trial in which the RCC provided 5 doses of the experimental drug. The woman's condition turned critical before the 5th dose, but she survived. What were the violated norms? Required animal experiments had not yet been completed. Subjects were not informed they were participating in a trial. Informed consent was not obtained. What was the outcome? Under pressure from the media and NGOs, the government was forced to take action but only suspended the research for 6 months. The Indian Council of Medical Research conducted an inquiry into his trial, but the results have not been made public. The Johns Hopkins University admitted that previous drug safety testing and the trial's consent forms had been inadequate. It barred the involved scientist from serving as principal investigator on any future research involving human subjects. 22. Keraporide trial in Argentina. Drug Keraporide was on trial for protection against further heart damage after angina, artery clearing or bypass surgery. It was sponsored by Hoechst Marion Roussel, now Sanofi Aventis, during 1997 at Naval Hospital, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Unethical aspects. None of the 137 patients participating in the trial at the Naval Hospital in Buenos Aires consented to the trial. The signatures on at least 80 informed consent forms were forged, and those who did sign the paper themselves did not know its contents. In total 13 patients died and at least 3 of them were considered murders because they were not given the right treatment. Data in medical records was changed and key documentation disappeared. In total, the drug was tested in more than 11,500 patients at nearly 400 study sites in 23 countries. What norms were violated? Not all subjects were informed they were participating in a trial. Consent was not obtained or fully informed. What was the outcome? A criminal lawsuit was started and the company decided not to apply for U.S. marketing approval because of the disappointing outcomes of the trials.